Okay, I'm having an issue with the camera here. It's not, that camera is not coming on. Well, we'll just have to do without it. Okay. All right, let's pray. Thank you, Father, for a beautiful, sunny morning, a reminder of the beauty of our God and your care for us in manifesting your beauty for us to see and to appreciate. And Lord, we thank you that wherever we go in this world, we see evidence of that in one form or another. Different kinds of foliage, animal life, and other things, but always, 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 we are confronted with the greatness of our God and his creative genius. And just as we think about differences in cultures as well, may we be reminded of that same truth as we look at peoples and customs. And I pray for you give us discernment to act in a way that is in keeping with those cultures insofar as they are consistent with biblical truth. I pray in Jesus' name, amen. All right, I think we mentioned about Buddhism in Thailand. That's letter C, okay? And then Christianity, letter D, okay? While Confucian, and then underneath that, while Confucianism plays a much bigger role in China, Japan and Korea, religious diversity plays a major role in South Asia. Lots of diversity. And even within Buddhism, for example, lots and lots of strains of Buddhism. And that's true in general. In Japan, okay, you're talking primarily a Buddhist culture, at least when you think nationally. But in reality, most Japanese people don't really embrace Buddhism so much on a day-by-day basis. What do they embrace? We talked about this in non-Christian religions. Anybody remember that? Yeah.
Is it more animism and ancestor worship?
Yeah, which they would classify as Shinto. But Shinto is essentially animism and ancestor worship, exactly. And there's ancestor worship in Buddhism too. I mean, it's all syncretized. There's a lot of mixture. But for them, for Japanese, even though Buddhism is the national representative religion, the one that really hits them day by day, you know, when they're deciding who to marry, what to buy, whether they're going to get better, it's Shinto, because that's what gives them the direct connect with the spirit world and ancestors and all that stuff. And that's true in a lot of areas, not just in this part of the world, but anywhere where you see those major religions. A dominant representative religion, and I mean, that is even true when it comes to Europe and Christianity. A lot of people would call themselves Christians, even in America, but you know, underlying what drives them on a day-by-day basis can be something very different. Okay, so dominant cultural values in this region. Well, loose when it comes to social norms, but there are pockets of conservatism and strictness. For example, Thailand is warm, hospitable, easygoing, and fun-loving. Again, what's the one thing we keep coming back to about Thailand that has made it a little bit exceptional? Something about Thailand that has caused it to be a little different than some others in that cluster.
All the tourism.
Yeah, tourism, exactly. Because tourism is money, and money can change a lot of things. Yeah. So, and I would never say that the Thai people are controlled by the tourist industry, but it does play a big role in the way that they live. Low uncertainty avoidance, otherwise known as, what's another way to state the same thing? High risk, exactly. When you think about how loosely connected this cluster is, lots of islands, it's stretched out. There's not as much, you know, of a sense of security and oneness. And there's been a lot of migration from the Arab world down as far as like Papua New Guinea. And so with that kind of reality, risk is going to be on a much higher level. And then more of a being than a doing culture, which is probably most of the world, more being than doing. Collectivist. However, there's a greater ease with individualism in South Asia. But by and large, it's a collectivistic culture. And again, that's true for most of the two-thirds majority world. High power distance. And not to be vainly repetitious, but that's also true with the two-thirds majority world, okay? And then very high context. Honor, shame is the name of the game in this cluster. So saving face is paramount. And again, if you're ministering that area, just a reminder, don't misjudge people if it takes them a while to come around to the point. If there's a problem and it takes 3 or 4 times as long there to get to the point and deal with it as it does in your culture, that's not because they're trying to avoid the issue. It could, but we can try that here too. But it's really more because of the importance of saving face and preserving what? What's at the top of the pyramid for them? In contrast to Maslow's pyramid? Social harmony. You got it. So some do's and taboos. Do be conscious of eating preferences. By the way, speaking of eating, did anybody here go to the Seder? Somebody, did you try the lamb? Had you had lamb before? Was that first time you've had it before? Did it taste quite different? It kind of reminds me of deer a little bit. I haven't had deer a lot. Have you had it before, Jules? Okay. Yeah, that's what I was asking. Yeah, if you've had lamb.
It was a different kind of lamb, though.
Yeah.
It was like, they were mutton. My brother-in-law, before he knew it was illegal, brought it to our house, and then we ate mutton. But then later found out that it was illegal. Us kids were like, oh, oops. So we never did that again.
Well, the comment my wife made was that is how fatty it was. She noticed how fatty it was. I don't know if that's true of lamb in general or not, but we talked about the Old Testament principle that the fat is what belonged to the Lord, right? That was the sweet part, that which promoted health. We don't think of fat as promoting health, but you know. All right, do try food do try food you're given if possible. All right. Don't discuss religious differences. Now, what am I saying? I'm saying you can't be a witness in this cluster? No. The idea here is don't make that your first item of discussion. It takes longer to develop respect and trust with people of this cluster. So don't be in a hurry to jump to religious discussion. All right? And do take in the culture in bite-sized chunks, pun intended. Bite-sized chunks translates into time. It takes time to develop relationships. And it really, in any culture, that's true. But in some like this one, it may take longer. And so that's why if you're on a short-term trip, just keep that in mind. If you don't get as deep with the people as you'd like to on that trip, if you go away not feeling like, man, I wish I'd have been able to make better friends, it's just the reality of a short-term trip. Don't let that bother you. It takes years for these things to develop. Years. All right, so any questions about this cluster? Confucian, South Asian cluster. All right. Well, now we're going to the Confucian Asian cluster. So you may have to go backwards in your notes. Confucian Asian. Well, let's see. Who can tell me something about this word Confucian? Give me a little bit of context here. Go ahead, Delaney.
It comes from Confucius, and he was a Chinese philosopher.
Yes. Yes. He was a Chinese philosopher, and that is the best term to use. There's our speaker this morning. The next 3 days, Dr. Kevin Bowder. Confucius. And so when we study Confucianism, are we studying a philosophy or are we studying a religion, or is it a little bit of both? James, you remember anything about that? Or right, you were in that class too, huh?
Correctly, it's kind of based on both. It had a lot to do with good works.
Yeah, I think when push comes to shove, we would say it's more of a philosophy than it is a religion. It's very much an Asian counterpart to secular humanism in the United States, in the West, all right? Although there are some that would call secular humanism a religion, okay? Some of that has to do with how you define religion and all that. But yeah, we do study it as a non-Christian religion, but with that caveat, all right? Because most Confucianists don't claim a particular deity, personal deity for themselves. They're not necessarily opposed to people recognizing deities, but they themselves do not embrace a particular deity, okay? And many of them don't believe that there's a supreme deity out there somewhere, okay? I thought that was a cool picture because it shows the tradition of the Confucianist culture, but also with the modernity of the big cities in the background. Yeah. Okay. So there it is. And of course, you know, there are basically 3 countries here, right? China, Japan, and Korea. And not that they're the only ones that would embrace Confucianism, but nationally speaking, they're the 3. Japan, of course, is largely Buddhist. So Confucianism, even though it plays a role there, it's not nearly as obvious, doesn't stand out like Buddhism and Shinto, okay? But that's what we're talking about. Remember, we just looked at this one here, starting in Iran, working all the way down to Papua New Guinea. Now we're going just slightly north and hitting these, all right? And there's Mongolia right next door, right? You haven't been there, right? But your sister that was there, right? In Mongolia. And her husband, they went together too, didn't they? They met there, that's right. That's right, that's cool. Yeah, Janet and Chris. Emma, did you have your hand up?
No, I'm just eating both.
Oh, you're okay. There's a little closer shot. All right. Yeah. So, as the name of this cluster suggests, this region is associated with the great Chinese philosopher Confucius. Yeah, interesting. Chopsticks actually becomes a part of our discussion. So, would anybody like to venture a guess? What do chopsticks have to do with Confucianism? Who's good with chopsticks? Or who can eat well with chopsticks? You do get that, Riley? I've been to Japan like 9 times, and yet my wife, she's good. I just haven't gotten it. And I've asked different people the technique, for holding, and everybody else will give you a slightly different explanation. No, it's like, yeah, you good with chopsticks, Jules?
No.
No?
But my family, it took me years to accomplish the skill of getting it, and they're all like, this is how you do it, and each one does a little bit different.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what might chopsticks have to do with the Confucian Asian cluster? Chopsticks. Yeah.
Does it have to do with discipline?
Ooh. Now, it might. I haven't heard that one. What do you mean?
With chopsticks, it takes patience and focus too. Maybe some people don't have to focus as much, but I just thought it has to do with discipline. And you're eating slower, so you're balancing your food diet.
Yeah, that's my biggest beef with chopsticks. I eat fast. So when I get impatient, I drop my chopsticks and grab my fork. That may be. I hadn't heard that one before, but that's legit. Yeah. Remember when we talked about the English? What did we note about utensils? It might stand in contrast with chopsticks.
They kind of thought of them as weapons.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. Remember, I think it was Henry VIII that outlawed the sharp knives. You had to use dull knives. So the idea of a butter knife, kind of, right. Chopsticks are viewed in the Confucian Asian culture as utensils that are peaceful. They're not, now, one source I read says that doesn't mean that somebody can't use them as weapons. I mean, you could probably find a YouTube demonstration of somebody, yeah, you can stab somebody. But, it doesn't have it doesn't pose the same threat as a fork or a knife, okay? And so it really is a reflection of the Confucian culture, because part of Confucianism is this idea, it's a philosophy, at least it likes to be viewed as a philosophy that's peaceful, that promotes, harmony and everybody getting along. And so the use of chopsticks removes the element of threat that forks and knives sometimes present. Yeah, quite interesting. Yeah.
Do you think that it also could be because they're easier to make? Just grab something like,
Yeah,
tilt it a little bit
I'm sure that practically speaking, yeah, that's also an advantage. When we were in Japan one of the last trips, we went into this store, and the store was probably twice the size of this room here, and it was lined, every wall was lined with, literally probably thousands of different kinds, variations of chopsticks. I mean, they all looked a lot alike, but the colors, there were some gorgeous chopsticks in there. And my wife bought a set for, so when sometimes we have people over, she'll put out the chopsticks. Yeah, but so in that sense, they're not. They can be very fancy, but in terms of just the shape and the material, yeah, yeah, good point. All right, so chopsticks. Now come on, now don't do that. You're not supposed to give us everything at once. That's not fair. All right, well, here we go. Confucius believed that knives and forks signified aggression. There you go. Aggression. We don't think of that. Chopsticks reflect gentleness and benevolence. They are also associated with certain superstitions. Here you go. And by the way, don't get scared. If these things happen to you in a Confucian Asian cluster, they understand you're an American. They're not going to, But if chopsticks are uneven, you'll miss a boat, a plane, or a train. Something's going to happen. Dropping them brings bad luck. Well, most Americans are trying to learn how to use chopsticks. Most Westerners are going to drop them. Crossing them means we're done. Man, then I'm done. Because I can't, every time I try, that's one of the biggest problems I have trying to use them. I get them in the rice or whatever it is, and I squeeze it, and it's, I think, oh man. Passing them from one to another is taboo. And I don't think that's because of hygienic issues. While he had those in his mouth, so I don't want them. I think there's more behind it than that. Do we have any kinds of superstitions like that with silverware? I don't think so. I've never heard of any, table settings and things like that. So, but again, if you're in the flat world, and they give you chopsticks. I ate at Who Hot the other day. My wife and I took our speaker, Jeff Davis, who was here, we took him to Who Hot. And I used my chopsticks for about 10 minutes until I got hungry. I decided to go for the fork. So that's just something that's interesting to keep in mind. To Westerners, Confucianism seems about as relevant as fortune cookies, which aren't even found in Asia. If you want a fortune cookie, you have to go to an American Chinese restaurant. As far as I know, there's no other place. Now, having said that, you'll probably find one somewhere because of globalization, but really that whole idea of fortune cookies was popularized in the US and not in Asia, right? But Okay, let's be honest. How many of you open your fortune cookie and read it and wonder if there's any truth in what it says? Well, every one of those statements you could apply just about to anybody. Yeah. Something special is going to happen to you today. Well, no. Or somebody is thinking about you right now. Fortune cookies. Not much is known about the personal life of Confucius. It really is more. But remember something, and those of you who've had non-Christian religions will remember this. In most of these Asian religious systems, history is not a big deal. They don't place a lot of emphasis on, for instance, Christianity really rises and falls in the minds of some on the historical viability of it. So that's why there's a lot of emphasis on demonstrating, the witnesses of the resurrection of Christ and the early church witness. And we place a lot of emphasis on history. But in that cluster of the world, it's the actual history of the people is not nearly as important. Buddha, for example, we study the history of Buddha, but there are always question marks. Okay, is that really what happened in his life? Is that how it happened? We're not sure, but Buddhists don't care because it's what he represents. We use the illustration of Washington chopping down the cherry tree. Did he really chop down the cherry tree, or is that just a mythological story that kind of highlights, the principle of honesty in America? Americans don't really care whether he actually chopped it down or not. It's what it symbolizes that matters, and that's true on steroids in this cluster. Okay, so not a whole lot is known about the life of Confucius. Let's make a few observations about Confucianism. Now, again, this will be review for those who studied non-Christian religions. I don't know if you remember the religion of Li. Okay, there are actually a few words here. It is not so much a religion as a philosophy. Okay, we already made that statement. It includes three main concepts. So if you're in this cluster, Li refers to order, and that includes etiquette, civility, propriety, protocol, body language, dress. So here in America, you can be whatever you want to be, dress however you want to dress, in general. You can drive whatever kind of car you want to drive. You do whatever you want with your time. Time is yours unless you're at work, okay? But in this cluster, there's a lot more social harmony expressed in these ways, all right? And that's what Li means. And so if you're going to be true to Confucianism, you need to conform to these standards in order not to rock the boat. Japan practices a tighter Confucianism than China. That's probably just because of the sheer size and diversity of China. Japan's an island nation. People live much closer together. You can get on a bullet train and get most anywhere in Japan, in a few hours. As an example, Chinese may belch loudly, but not Japanese. Now, you've probably heard of cultures that belch. In fact, one other culture that we haven't studied yet promotes belching. Can you think of it? The Arab cluster. Because belching signifies what? Yeah.
It means that you were grateful and it was a good.
Exactly. How do you say, man, that was good? You belch. If you watch Ben-Hur, the 59 version, you see that happening with the sheik. Judah is hosted in his house, and he enjoys the meal, and the sheik kind of looks at him like, was the food not to your liking? I said, oh yeah, it was delicious. And Belshazzar, who's there, he's back behind the sheik. He's trying to get Judah to belch. He finally gets the idea, and so he, does a real weak, little belch, and the sheik is happy. But that's true in China as well. You can belch, and it's considered, I love this food. Then there's Yi. Yi is the second word. Sorry. Thought I had the sound off on this. Let me just fix that. Yi is righteousness or performing the custom correctly. So Li says this is the way that we're supposed to conduct ourselves, all right? And Yi says this is how we do it correctly. So it's not just, it's like we would say it's a custom for Christians to go to church, That's li, and yi is when we go to church, this is how we go about church. That's the difference. This is what they do, that's how you do it. What class is that next door? Then there's Ren. It's inner harmony and peace of mind you feel when you have followed the custom correctly. Social harmony is very important in this cluster. So the Ren is the result. So Li, what you do, Yi, how you do it, Ren, the resultant peace that comes from that, the harmony, not just inner harmony, but as a result, social harmony as well. And at first glance, it sounds really good, right? It makes sense. The problem is it's not founded on truth. I mean, the Bible really does speak to these three as well, doesn't it? The Bible gives us guidelines on how to live, or what we do as believers, how we go about doing it correctly, and the resultant peace and joy that gives us, obeying the Lord. So the problem is not the mechanics of this. The problem is the foundation, or lack thereof, because it's very humanistic. There's really no foundation in God's truth here. All right. So 5 key relationships in Confucian culture. So help me out. What would be the most important relationship in the Confucian culture? And again, some of you have been down this road already. Most important relationship that exists here. Okay, and even more specifically, it is family. Okay, the father and then somebody else in the family make the most important particular relationship. Pardon? Well, okay, if the grandfather is living in the house, because, in that cluster, whoever is the oldest patriarch is usually the one that, but there's a special relationship between the father and the son. Why? Why does this relationship govern all other relationships? What's unique about the father-son relationship? Yeah, Paul?
I guess to take on the family's name.
Yep. It's all about inheritance. It's all about the perpetuation of the family, and that happens through the son. Yep. So the father is responsible to hand down and perpetuate the family name to and through his son. And then his son, carries that forward. Very, very important. Remember ancestor. Now remember, a lot of Confucians don't even regard the ancestors, but the fact is many of them do, because there's a lot of syncretism. But that's what makes that relationship so important. So ladies, sadly, if my wife in this culture has 4 children and they're all girls, we're not very happy. Not because we don't like girls, but because we need an heir. And that's very important. That's not just true here, but it's also true in the Arab culture, as we'll see later. Then the second most important is the elder brother to the younger brother. Okay, because again, being brothers, being the men in the family under the father, they extend the father's care. And then the husband and wife. Yeah, Jules?
I was actually going to add to that too. Even if you do have a son and they have some sort of disability, then it kind of brings a little bit of shame on the family because they can't function as properly as without a disability.
Interesting.
And then it just brings, that also brings pain.
Interesting. So the wholeness of the person physically and otherwise is also very important. Yeah, that's very interesting. I'm guessing, you can correct me, that at least in some cases, a disability like that would be viewed as some sort of a curse or something handed down from ancestors because of something that's in the family that's not right.
Yeah, they view it as a curse on them.
Yeah, a lot of superstition. Just imagine some of these cultures, people live in constant fear of something they may have done to offend somebody. And so anytime something happens, a drought, cancer, earthquake, whatever it might be, political upheaval, it's always viewed as something like that. The husband and wife relationship is important, but only in the third sense. And then ruler to subject comes next. And if you look at the history of this cluster, you see a lot of totalitarianism, right? Monarchs, and so that is an important relationship. And then elder to junior in general. I'm not talking about brother here, but just in general. If you're in society and you confront someone who is older than you are, then it's very, very important that you use the right terms, the right way to address that person as an elder. Just like the word you, Y-O-U, we only have one word for it in English, but in other cultures, you use a specific word to address somebody older than you are. Yeah. All right. Any questions about that? It's interesting just to understand that. Now, if you're there serving the Lord, this can become useful, because what relationship in the Bible is most important? And I'm not talking necessarily even about the human relationship, but when Jesus came, he made a big deal of his relationship to his Father and the Son. The Father does this, the Son, Father's committed this to the Son. The unity, the relationship between the Father and the Son is amazingly important in the Gospels, okay? And all right. So Li, Yi, and Ren are learned through education. The education system is intended to teach people. The whole idea of public education is probably in any culture where it exists. The main idea is to prepare children to serve responsibly and honorably in their society. And that is also true, by the way, in the United States. Some of you guys have probably studied the public school movement here in the U.S., and the purpose of the public school movement was to prepare people to be responsible, good citizens, right? And that is also true here, but this is the essence of what they're after. All right. You change society by changing the individual for the benefit of family and community. Now, you say that sounds like individualism. I thought this was collectivistic. So what does that mean? Why the emphasis on the individual here in a collectivistic society?
One person can change the whole format of society for the better or for the worse.
All right. So you want to protect the harmony of the society by bringing that individual into conformity with the group. I don't remember if it's here. We're going to talk about the parable of the sheep. The guy loses the sheep. He got 100 sheep, 99 of them are in the fold, one of them's lost, right? He goes after that one sheep. And you might look at that and say, oh, that's an individualistic mindset. Actually, it may not be. It's that one sheep is the loss, the fact that sheep is lost actually presents a problem when it comes to the harmony of the flock. And so he goes after that one sheep, brings that sheep back so that the flock can live in harmony again. So it's a matter of perspective, how you look at it. All right. Why do Chinese businessmen insist on getting their visitors drunk? Now, I think we did talk about this once before. Do you remember that? Take them out, you take your subordinates out to dinner, and part of the meal is drinking. Get them drunk. Why? What's the point? Paul?
To find more about their inner self.
Yeah, right. So the boss wants to break down whatever barriers there may be inside of his employees. And so by getting them drunk, He can break him down. He can learn. They bond. They tend to bond to him more naturally when the resistance has been minimized. Exactly. Yeah. So it's viewed as a way of solidifying a business relationship. This is the whole point of the dinner engagement, that bonding idea. It brings them, and I think we mentioned this in a previous class, that for some people in this kind of a culture, the business relationship can actually be closer than even the family relationship. Even though the family relationship is considered to be front and center, for some who come from dysfunctional families, this is their alternative. The business relationship becomes their family. Chinese wine is 40 to 60% alcohol. So it's like drinking a bottle of NyQuil. Isn't NyQuil like 60 or 70%, something like that? A lot of. Confucius made an exception to wine, permitting unlimited consumption. Now, why would Confucius refer to it as an exception? Seems, I mean, what is it about wine that might produce an opposite effect? What does, yeah, go ahead.
It could like control your body in a way that, like it says in scripture, you're overcome with the mind and you can't really control your actions as much, so you can dishonor someone.
Okay, exactly. Abuse of wine can actually cause social disharmony because it causes oftentimes fighting and irrational behavior, confusion, right? And so in general, it would be viewed in a culture like this as not good for social harmony. But in a case like this, it breaks down barriers and promotes it. So Confucius apparently saw both sides of that, and he said, okay, wine would be okay for this reason, for this effect. Yeah. Drinking together deepens friendships. Well, we kind of have our version of that here. The guy talks about his drinking buddies, right? Or, you know, what do you do at a ball game? You know, tailgating. And very few people tailgate without having, you know, something to drink along with it. It kind of gets everybody together and have a good time. If you refuse to get drunk, you will have to work harder to build the relationship. So if you're a Christian living in a Confucian culture, no matter what your view is on social drinking, we all agree that drunkenness is wrong. And so if you're a Christian in a Confucian culture and your boss wants you to get drunk, okay, you know that the Bible prohibits that. You may not lose your job, but you may find it very difficult ever to get a raise or to get a promotion. Okay, you're always being passed up by others, right? The boss just, because you're not conforming to his standards. So it's a sort of passive persecution that you might experience. And Christians in these cultures often experience that kind of a passive persecution. It's not, you know, we're beating you up or putting you in jail, but we're just always leaving you behind and letting somebody else move forward. That idea. All righty. What cultural values best explain Confucian cultures? All right. Well, obviously collectivism. This cluster ranks highest in the world in collectivism. Right? Decisions are based on what is best for their in-group. That's a term we looked at way back at the beginning, but you know, keep that in mind. In-group refers to those who are closest to you. It's a deeper level of relationship. 2, this relates to the Chinese concept of guanxi, which means connections, which is based on trust, mutual obligations. Jules, that word ring a bell with you, guanxi? Guanxi, okay. But it refers to intimate relationships. And then 3, a relationship with no strings attached is no relationship at all. And just a quick, where are we here in the notes? Okay. Let me give you the last one. I want to come back and just say something here at the end. Strong commitment to cultural purity. People here are slow to welcome outsiders, a lack of trust that comes from Guanxi. Guanxi is, again, the idea of connections. And so if you're an outsider, then you may tend to disrupt the harmony that Connect group has produced. And so that threatens the purity of the group. So it takes time for you to work in. Let me just go back number 3 and before we're done here. No strings attached. There was a guy in India, a very successful medical doctor, and he invited a medical doctor friend from the US to come and visit him. And when the guy came, this guy threw a huge banquet for him. I mean, spent who knows how much money. Just the best of the best of the best. And then after this banquet was all over and everything, and gifts had been given to this visitor from the US and all that, the guy that invited him and gave him the banquet said, I have a son. He pulled him aside, said, I have a son that would like to study medicine in the US. Can you make that happen for me? And the medical doctor, the American medical doctor said, I can try, he said, but in our country, everybody has to go through the same procedure in order to get in. You have to apply, so I'll do the best I can for you. And after that meeting with this doctor, the American, he stayed around for a while, he noticed that all of a sudden, this guy wasn't quite as friendly toward him as he had been before. And things that he wanted to do as a medical doctor in India began to be blocked, and it became more difficult. And what he figured out was that because he didn't assure this Indian doctor that he would make sure his son got to study in the US, the guy felt dishonored. He felt that he had been shamed by this guy. And the American medical doctor was simply being honest and saying, I'm just telling you that's the way it is in my country. But sometimes, the point is, sometimes even when you say, that's just the way it is here, I'll try, it doesn't compute to them, because in their culture, there has to be a way to pull strings and make sure that this happens for a friend. So it's just an interesting thing to keep in mind. All right, time to go. We'll pick it up from here next time. Thank you.